water, flapping about, survival mode, get through childhood, get into adulthood, get a partner, in my days, get the wife, get the kids. I know it's slightly different now. Get the wife, get the kids, house, mortgage, pension, career, etc., etc. Retire, tinker about in the garden, couple of hobbies and pop your clogs, But I think there's a bit more to it if we can tap into it. So that, as I say, the work I do is about helping people to be more embodied, be more present, be more mindful, learn to track ourselves and see what's going on in our system, pay attention to our behaviour. And this is also what ACL is about. Watch out for our mindsets, projections, transferences, all the psychological stuff, all the psychological functioning. But it's also about moving us. So we come into the world as this pure divine love. And because the world isn't the Garden of Eden, at some point as a young infant, because we feel unsafe, we find ourselves basically figuring out a different way of behaving than the way that we would naturally behave. And from that moment, as far as I'm concerned, we become religious beings because we disalign from being our true self, and we become psychologically functioning. So the psyche or soul, the being that we are, that we feel ourselves to be right at the core, learns to behave, to think about how to behave to some extent, psychologic, soul and logic. So we figure out how best to behave to get our needs met and to survive and to feel safe. But we're not just being our true self anymore. And so we go through life then psychologically functioning in the ego. But then as we get to later life, we want to be able to be our truth and not behave that way. And so that's spiritual awakening. That's us beginning to hatch out of the egg, out of the ego, to be our true self. That's midlife crisis. If it becomes a crisis, that's spiritual awakening. And it's really a journey of moving from the head, from logic to the heart. So it's a movement from psychological to psycho-spiritual, connecting. So the soul is connected to the spirit of itself and its truth and the fact that it is love. And so that was my training, my psychosynthesis training for 5 years in London. And so that journey is then away from all of the psychological functioning, the mindsets, projections, transferences, counter-transferences, maintaining cycles, coping mechanisms, being caught in living in relation to your own childhood traumas, egoic functioning, our neuroses, which is where we behave a certain way because we have concerns about how other people will think about us in relation to what we're doing, how our behaviour is. It's about self-confidence, self-esteem. That's all the psychological functioning stuff. But then as we move from that and become more enlightened, more awake, it's then more about, as we learn this journey that I'm describing here, coming in pure, going into egoic functioning, coming back out. So that's the religion, coming back out, the re-lignment. Okay, so to me it's got nothing to do with any religion. It's something that happens to us all. We learn to be more present, more embodied, more mindful, learn to function more out of our intuition, rather than functioning out of our conditioning from childhood. And a lot of this is unconscious, but we learn to become more conscious. It's about moving more from our head to our heart and taking the time to be present and feel what our heart's offering rather than just the immediate response of the head. Because when we understand our journey through life in the way that I'm offering it, we end up with, as I say, a container that holds us, and we can have a sense of the meaning of life, how it works, why we're here, to spiritually awaken to ourselves. We then become less judgmental of ourselves, more compassionate, empathic, sympathetic, forgiving, kind. We find more ability to discern our truth and express our truth from our heart without being too caught up and concerned about doing it wrongly and offending the other, upsetting the other. So it's a psycho-spiritual education, which I'm about, and ACOL is doing the same thing. it's about moving from self-survival. So I sometimes see that we go through life living in this kind of space that's in here. So this is self-survival, and this is self-fulfillment. In the early part of life, we need to live in the bottom one, and then we awaken to live more in the top, so that we can have so we move from seeking materialistic purpose, meaning and value in life to seeking spiritual purpose, meaning and value in life. What else have I got? We move from separation to union. So instead of me being interested simply in myself and my family and those that I love, and it's tough luck for everybody else, it's, that type of thing. It becomes more loving, more caring. We realise that there's no point in me pushing you down to me to get up, because all that happens then is you want to push me down so that you can get up, and we're all just pushing against each other instead of working together. To bring it to a bit of a slightly Christian context, it's about moving from the tree of knowledge to the tree of life. So you may recall that's in Genesis, where God creates Adam and he says there's many trees in the garden that are good for this and that, and in the centre of the garden there are two trees, the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. Do not eat of the tree of knowledge, for on that day you will die. Okay. Now, to me, when I was writing my first book, I was receiving all sorts of revelations, and for me what it means is basically left brain, which is logic, reason, thought, all of that stuff, which is again that survival kind of mode, psychological functioning, in contrast to staying true to what feels alive and vital and rich, the tree of life. Again, to speak to the spiritual, there's lots of stuff going on just now in the name of spirituality, etc. And a lot of it is about escapism, the mindfulness and the meditation stuff, which is excellent and all good, but not if you're using it to escape. If you're using that just to go to some, disidentified, disconnected place where you can escape the world and be in some kind of la-la land, that's not what it's about. That's not the point. It's about creating heaven on earth. So it's about awakening from that psychological level of functioning to the more spiritual level of functioning, more to being able to be present, be embodied, be in our truth, be our heart's truth, express that lovingly, kindly in the world, in relationships with other people. It's about knowing the essence of who and what we are at a spiritual level as the divine source embodied in this human form, and going through life awakening to ourselves to come to that realisation. So this is Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, with self-realisation, self-actualising at the top, up here, down the bottoms, the basic needs of air, food, water, etc. And then it comes up to shelter and relationships, and up we'll go. To me, in a sense, it's also about moving from belief and what you believe to be love. So don't get caught up in what's in your head and your stories, your conditioning, etc., your beliefs. Put your beliefs secondary to being loving and caring and kind, and try and set all of our opinions, etc., apart. So I see that video is now, wherever we are, it's about 13-14 minutes long, somewhere. There we go, yeah, 15 minutes. So I think it's long enough. If you're interested in myself, who I am, what I'm about, give me a shout. I do this work anyway. I don't always just do it through a course of love. Doesn't have to be through a course of love. But a course of love is quite good, and it's not, as I say, it's not overly heavy on the kind of Christianity. It's more about awakening that Christ consciousness within us, our true essence, because that when we function from there, that's the part of us that can see our egoic behaviour, but it can also see ourselves as the kind of spiritual self, and it sits in the middle and awakens us to who we are, and to help us to be in the world with spiritual purpose, meaning and value, with a spiritual practice that is grounded and relational and embodied, and it's about humanity. It's about that kind of creating heaven on earth.